All right, so last we looked at this, I had a much simpler layout. The more complex you get, the more detail, the more stuff you add, the more obviously complex this whole thing can get. The essence of it is just a few nodes. So I copied the essence of it. That's it there. So you have a read node, you read your footage in, you use a CameraTracker to track the footage. And then from the CameraTracker, you're creating a camera that gets connected to a scene, and then everything gets connected to a Scanline Render. Okay? So this is the bare essence of everything that we've just done. Now, the other thing that we went over is the model builder, how we can basically add just a plane and have that plane like locked in position. The whole point of this is that it makes it easier for us to put something inside of our scene. So I will copy that as well over to my area here. And just drop this in. Here's my camera, here is my source. And then I will view that. All right, I'm just going to disable my other stuff I have over here. That. I don't know why it's still showing those, whatever. All right. All right, so I'm looking through my model builder. I've double-clicked the node, and this is where we were able to create just basically a shape wherever we want. So I create a shape here. I line it up with my edges. Like that. I go up a little bit in my timeline and then just slide it back into position. And Nuke should kind of pick up the perspective changes that we had. So that now, go ahead. Yeah, this is Nuke X. So everything we're doing, yeah, is Nuke X. And then throughout, we can adjust it slightly if we need to. It's a little bit off here, a little bit off there. We can go through and adjust. And then this gives us a card that we can then just click on and then bake. And then that gives us an actual like 3D card that we can drop something on. Unless you just wanted, to see where the stuff is, that's what the model builder will do. But to actually get something out you can use, you have to export a card or any one of these other pieces of geometry. So if I was tracking a cube, I could put a cube there, and that would track the cube. So let's say that I had a cardboard box on the floor, and it's not just flat plane like what the screen is. I could have a cube lined up and adjust all the corner points, move up in the timeline, adjust the corner points again, move up in the timeline, adjust the points again, and then I would basically just have a box as a shape that I could apply other stuff to. Okay, so that's the essence of why we're using this model builder. Now, from doing this, you can isolate pretty much any area in the scene. As you can see from this one, I have that one, I have the desk, I have this screen in the background, and then I also have this one here. Now, that one is a little bit trickier to do. I had to actually use basically the lines that are on the wall, and it's hard to see, but there's a dark area right here in the center, and I was kind of using that as my perspective line as to where everything would be lined up to, okay? So I was able to isolate that as well. If you are in 3D and you're doing this for a movie kind of thing, typically at this point we'd actually export this entire setup out and then be able to go through and start to orient the scene so that it makes more sense. The way that the 3D scene gets set up right now is that this is like a weird angle. Like my desk, if you look at where the desk top is, you can see this isn't perfectly flat. I'd want to bring this into 3D and actually make that desk flat by rotating basically the entire scene so that it did sit flat. You can do it in Nuke, it's just a lot harder to do it inside Nuke. Same thing with my wall right there. You'll see that the wall one is actually like in front of the screen one, which doesn't make sense, but that's just how it lines up. Okay, so I would actually spend a lot more time doing that. When they do something for ILM, for Avengers, for any of those big movies, they actually shoot a picture of the scene and they rebuild that scene in the correct scale and drop it in there. And that way they can see the camera actually moving through the scene And then whatever they need, it's just like, I want to replace the screen, there it is. I want to replace the wall, there it is, okay? We're not doing that, but that's what they do. All right, so now what can we do with this process once we have it? So here's one thing. So in the last one, I was trying to show how we can remove something from the scene. So in this case, I want to remove this keyboard and mouse and these cables. So what I did was, there it goes. I took a still image and I brought it into Photoshop. So now because this is basically a sequence, we can just take a sequence. So I grabbed number 44 from my frame stack, and I'm using frame 44 as the frame that I'm going to use to keep this area cleaned. So if I look at that, you'll see that there is nothing on the desk. And if I go to frame 44 and I switch between the two, you'll see that the only difference there is the desk. The camera is not moving at that point, okay? It's important to know which frame I grabbed because I need to lock the camera in for when I do my next stuff. So I'm going to grab the camera I don't need because I already have, I do need the camera. I'm going to grab the camera. I'm going to grab my Project 3D. Actually, I'll just grab this. That works. I don't need anything else. Okay. So I have a card right here, which is right there. I'm just going to copy that over too. So these are all things that I've already tracked, the same way that we did them before with the model builder. This is just a piece of geometry right here. If I drop this image on the card, and then I drop this into my scene, and then I turn off my, I don't have a source, do I? No. Right there I do. No, I don't. When I look at my Scanline Render, you'll see that it looks like this, okay? So what it's doing is there's basically just this card piece of paper like this. It's taking that image and like stretching it out to fit on the card. That looks stupid. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is have it basically like wherever my camera is, project that texture so that just the desk is what gets updated, okay? So that's why I brought in a copy of the camera. This is the same camera that is here. There's no difference as far as this one versus that one. The only thing that I have to do differently to that camera 4 is if I double click it, I've deleted the animation. So I clicked on this and I went to no animation. Went to this, no animation. Making sure that I'm at frame 44. Okay, so just so you can see that process, if I copied it, pasted it, I'm at frame 44, that's my frame. I said no animation, yes, and no animation, yes. That's exactly what I did, okay? Now the reason that I did that is because I need to have a camera that's basically locked into that direction or in that position. Now what I'm going to do is do a Project 3D. So this is going to take a camera like this, and it's going to take an image like this, and it's going to project it onto my card. So once it does that, you'll see that now it's projecting just that desk area right onto the desk. Now the way it's isolated is because that was my card. That was my item from my model builder right here that I isolated just that desk area. Okay, so here's my image, just frame 44. Here's my camera with all the animation deleted except for frame 44's spot. It's projected 3D wise, and it's put into a model builder. So now what I do with this is using my scene, using my render, I get basically a rendering of this. So now when I hit play, that's what I get. Okay, so I'm basically getting a clean version of my tabletop moving around. Now I can take this and merge it, just like we did our other stuff, back onto my original piece of footage. Right, so there it is. So when I rewind, it's locked in place. When I hit play, you'll see that that tabletop stays in place the entire time. It's locked right to those coordinates. Now obviously there's issues with it. We basically have my, it's cutting it out. But you'll see that the chair here is also has like this piece on it that's not working. And then the top of the Mac screen is also not working. The reason that this thing works, or is going to work, is because that desk is pretty flat. Once we start introducing other elements in front of it, on top of it, on the other side of it, that's when it starts losing the believability of it, so all of this. So then what I have to do is I have to basically create a cutout shape for all of these things that I want to cut out. So on this merge right here, I'm going to add a roto off to the side and just connect that to it. There we go. So now the second I do that, because I have a roto, you'll see that this just disappears. My shape is now gone. If I use my roto and outline, let's say, just the chair first, and I just went to a random frame. This is frame 34, okay? It's showing me in this square, that's where my, my plane exists. So I'm going to go to my roto and just say invert. Okay. I can't do that. I have to actually hit invert. There we go. So now it's showing me the chair. It's cutting out the background. So then I would scoot up a little bit. Let's say frame 43. I would grab this whole thing, and then I would scoot it down. And then resize it so that it fits that chair. And you may need to, just like I'm doing, kind of like scoot things away and then bring them back. And you may need to grab these little feathering handles and just feather this out just a little bit, because the chair actually did have some softness to it. Okay, remember I can use Q to turn off my overlay just to kind of see what that looks like. That's fine. I'm not sure what this little chunk is. That's just something random. I go back in time. I grab all of this again. I outline the chair. I do the same process. Pull it away from the chair. Bring it to the chair. Pull this away from the chair. Bring it to the chair. A little bit of feather there, pull this down, a little bit of feather there. Oops. All right, so a little bit more time, a little more effort, I'd be able to get that so that it looks like that roto is following it and cutting that chair out of my image, okay? What it's doing is we're getting this image out of here. That's the image that we're actually getting from our render passes, from our tracker. I need to cut this corner of the chair off, basically, or this corner of the desk off, so that my other chair would actually be visible there. So that's what we're doing at each one of these frames, is just lining it up so that it cuts off that portion of the desk that the chair was covering. Okay, so I would do that for anything that I needed to do that for. So this part of the chair, and then obviously that part of the Mac screen would also get that same treatment. Okay, that way I'm basically just covering up the desk. Now on mine over here, no, there we go. Instead of me, Scanline, road, multiply, there it is. Instead of me doing that process, I want to explore a different way to do it. So here is my original piece of footage. Okay, no difference there. What I did was I put a roto on it. And the roto is basically the chair area. Okay. So this is just another way to do the exact same thing. Part of it is inverted. Part of it is pre-multiplied. So it now is just the chairs. If you remember, we can basically key things out that are contrasty. There's a lot of contrast between the chair and the desk itself. So I can actually use the chairs as a way to pull a key to extract the chairs out of that frame. Okay? Now, the setup here is obviously a bit more of a setup than the other one was, but this one is a bit more automatic too, okay? The other one just requires a bit more work. So I roto it just to get this basic shape. I pre-multiply it so that it's actually cut out. And then I just pull a keyer on it, and you'll see my A and B are pretty close together. So if I look at the alpha channel, that's what it looks like. So I'm basically just cutting out this portion of that. Now, if I looked at it before, that's what it looked like. As I started to pull it, you can see how the desk is really bright, and then I can basically eliminate the chairs. Okay, so the chairs are almost gone, maybe a little bit this way, and then a little bit more that way. There we go. So now the chair is totally gone. Now, in order for this to work, I did have to erode it a little bit, so it's nice and soft. So I just added erode, just like we've done on the previous one. And then in order for this to work for the entire thing, I actually have to merge it. So here's one of my alphas, which is the original thing we started with, and I'm merging it into that. So here is this, and then they merge together to create that mess right there. Okay? Now again, it's more complex, but this is more of an automated setup. So now if we look at this, this is the alpha channel for that. And you'll see it's like pretty smooth. There's a couple spots that need to be fixed, like right there. But I can very easily just create a little roto shape and just white out those areas. Okay? Once you have a basic key like we do here, I can just drop in a roto. Draw a shape, and you'll see that it just fills in by default with white. And then it's just a matter of scooting it and then scooting it. Okay, so one method, I'm grabbing the shapes themselves and going frame by frame pretty much and positioning where I want them. The other method is I'm pulling a key. It won't work all the time. If you have a different shot, a different angle, the shadows are too harsh, whatever it is, you may not work. But you always try to find quicker solutions. Okay, so that's the new thing. Everything else is exactly the same as it was before. I did also animate some text. Nuke is not great at having text in the scene, but just so you can see, there is like a text thing. So if you just create a text node, you can type text in here. You can play with some basic formatting. If you want something fancier, go into Photoshop or Illustrator and draw it out there and then bring it in. But if you just want to have just random text here, you can definitely just do this. And then what I did was I took the text and then I just animated it bouncing around. Pretty obnoxious here, but then once we put it inside the scene, oops, let me hit tab there. Oops, I disabled my scene, so it's not going to show anything. Close this. Nothing else is disabled, yes? Yes. So view that, no alpha. Hold on, this is my merge. Oops, I didn't merge it, that's why. There we go. Ignore the bat for a second too, that was something else. We'll show you the bat in a second. All right, so watch this back screen. You'll see the text kind of bouncing around on that back screen. Okay, and again, it's done the same exact way. I have a plane that's back there. I dropped an image on the plane, and now that image is just moving around the screen. It's wonderful. There it is. And then I also added Nuke has particles, so I added some particles here just as a placeholder. Eventually this will be an oozy kind of thing, kind of coming like out of the wall. So I will create an oozy type thing coming out of the wall. Creepy. Okay. This other thing, which was that bat that you saw there, which is right here. If you are a 3D person, or if you go to something like Turbo Squid, this is. Let's say computer. Okay, you can actually download 3D models. And so like this, here's a laptop, so you can actually download this 3D model and you could import that into Nuke and you could drop it like on a desk if you want to drop it on a desk. So remember the chair that we had in the very first one, we took pictures of the chair. That picture is only good from one angle. The second we try to turn around the camera or move around it, it's still a flat image, so it doesn't work. If we wanted to have that ability, this is where that would come in, us being able to go out there and grab a 3D model and actually put it into our scene. So the way that bringing 3D works into our scene, now that we actually have like a 3D world, you will have chaos. Like this is just insane how much stuff is already going on in here, but it is what it is, so just deal with that. I'm going to do a read geometry. So I hit the tab key and I do a read geo. And then I go to my folder, and just like we would find another item, we would just find whatever item it is we're bringing in here. So I'm going to grab my high-res crate in this case, because we already have the bat inside the scene. There it is. And if I need this bat, or this crate to have materials on it, I'm going to read in the textures. So I'm just going to hit R. Any item you download from TurboSquid, typically you're going to have materials for it. Some of them do, some of them don't. This one here, textures do not work. I'll murder you and your family tomorrow. You've been warned. Wow, that's pretty aggressive for a free model. So this one does come with textures. Maybe they work. Otherwise, it would just look like that, okay? Especially that's not appropriate for this time of day, right? So I'm going to go into my folder where I have my textures. It's not there. It's under my gaming. It's under this. It's under content. And geometry, textures, there it is. Medium res crate. Okay, so this one has a base color and metallic. That's the only two I'm needing for this one. And I don't think this is my high-res crate. This is actually my medium res crate, so let me grab my medium res crate. There we go. All right, so I can drop one of these images on here, and you really can't see anything happening right now, okay? So this isn't connected to a scene. This is just a random item. And that's one of the things about Nuke is that even though I've created lights and I've created objects, they don't actually exist in the same scene until I create a scene node and actually connect everything together. So now this item is inside of a scene. If I want lights, I have to create lights. So I go to light, I drag this onto the scene node, and then I can just pull the light out of here. And then I can make this light intensity a bit brighter, and now I can actually see the texture of that shape. And then I can duplicate the light. Oops. And that, come on. Connect that one, and then move this light here, and then pull it over there. Okay? So now this gives me just a basic, like, flat-looking texture. If I have any kind of like shininess to it, like the bat has, parts of it are very shiny and reflective, parts of it are very matte and like dull. So if I have something like that, I have to basically do a little step in between these. So I have to create what's called a Phong, and the Phong would sit between the texture and the object. And let me see where this connected. Yep, that's right. Okay, so this connected right to the diffuse. That's where I wanted. I would also have a specular map. That's what this is. So my green channel right here is a specular map. So I'm going to shuffle my green into all of these channels. Oops, sorry, not my green, my blue. Oops. There we go. And then my specular map will read the shuffle. And then, will it update? I may need to adjust some of my settings here. So let's adjust my specular a bit. Let's adjust my diffuse a bit. There we go. Okay, so now I can start adjusting some of these properties, even emission if I want it to look like it's kind of glowing, and I can do that. This is not a full-blown renderer, so if you have used 3D before, we don't get things like bounced light or anything that's going to look realistic. For this purpose, this is kind of just like an object that's in the scene. If you had something like in before, you would render something out of 3D as like a spinning object, and then you'd bring it in. You could just have that item inside here as a 3D spinning object and do stuff to it. Okay? So this is the setup, is that these two materials, or these two textures, go through a Phong, that goes into a read geometry, that goes into your scene, and then that would go into a Scanline Render. If you wanted to separate your items, because sometimes you do, you'll see like in this setup that I have one area that is a scene right here, and then another area that's a scene right there. This one is my desk that I needed to cut out. This one is just random stuff that I threw in there that didn't need to be cut out. So I have two scene nodes. My camera gets connected to both. I don't expect you to be able to master everything here. Basically, you're going to go in with a task of, I want to change something, and then gradually you'll work through the steps of getting that item on there. I want to remove something from my image. Here's how I can do that. Okay. For this one, I do want you to try to remove something from your scene, because that will be a common task you will have as far as cleaning up your stuff. Just to do a simple one, look for an area where you don't have a lot of stuff obscured. Okay, if you want just like something simple, this area right here in this specific shot, you'll see it doesn't have any desks or anything or any major things obscuring it. Right here there's a little bit, but it's so minuscule compared to how much was done there. Okay. If you want to replace something like the screen itself, you would actually need like two projections, one for the wall and one for the ground plane, because what we're doing is we need to rebuild the wall and rebuild the desktop in order for it to look like those two things don't exist. Okay, so it looks like this doesn't exist by creating one there and one there. And if you really get into the 3D stuff, you can do a whole lot of other things too. Like you could actually, eventually we'll get to that point where you at least see it, bringing the scene into 3D, and you could have stuff like I could have a hole open in the wall and a creature coming out of the hole and doing whatever. Okay, it all depends on your level of commitment as to how much stuff you want to add to it. Right, and this is a kind of a shorter shot anyway, so it's not a whole lot. Cool. Even that little particle thing that I had going on here, I could have like bugs crawling out of the wall versus just particles or some slimy thing. Okay, so start with something simple, just creating a plane, putting a screen on, an image on the screen, making sure it's moving, and then move on to erasing something from the scene. Okay, we're going to work on it today. We'll work on it next class as well. And then when we get back, that's when we'll wrap this one up and then go on to the next bit. Okay, so this won't be due right when we get back. It'll be due that week, but just not that Monday. Okay, questions yet?